I will now give the floor to Mr. Bernard-Henri Lévy, intellectual, philosopher, and writer from France, who will deliver the keynote statement to this informal meeting. Mr. Bernard-Henri Lévy, you have the floor.
Ambassadors, Excellencies, Presidents, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. It is not very often that a philosopher is called upon to speak in this forum. It is one of the first times Elie Wiesel, Jiddu Krishnamurti 30 years ago, that a writer stands up at this dais from which so many great voices have rung out, and where the cause of peace and brotherhood among people has achieved some of its most important and noble advances. It is therefore with great emotion and with a deep sense of honor that I address you today. You invited me this morning not to hear me hold forth on the honor and nobility of humanity, but rather to lament, alas, the renewed advance of this radical inhumanity, this total baseness that is anti-Semitism. In Brussels, just a few months ago, the memory of the Jews and the keepers of that memory were attacked. In Paris, just a few days ago, we heard once again the infamous cry, "Death to the Jews," and cartoonists were killed because cartooning, police for policing, and Jews just for shopping and being Jews. And in other capitals, in Europe and elsewhere, faulting the Jews is once again becoming the rallying cry of a new order of assassins, unless it is the same but cloaked in new habits. The United Nations was set up also to fight this plague. This assembly was given the sacred task of preventing those terrible spirits from reawakening, but they have returned, and that is why we are here. On the subject of this curse, on the subject of its causes and the means by which to resist it, I would like to begin by refuting briefly a number of current analyses that I fear serve only to keep us from looking this evil squarely in the face. It is not true, for example, that anti-Semitism is just a variety of racism. Both must be fought, of course, with equal determination, but one cannot fight what one does not understand. And it must be understood that if the racist hates in the other his visible and conspicuous otherness, the anti-Semite hates his invisible and indefinable difference, and on that awareness, the nature of the strategies that one will have to deploy is going to depend. Nor is it true that the new anti-Semitism has, as one hears constantly, especially here in the US, its main root in the Arab Muslim world. In my country, for example, it has a double source that acts as a sort of double bind. There are, it is true, the lost souls of a radical Islam that has become the most toxic opium, invading the lost territories of our republic, but there is also that old French monster that since the Dreyfus affair and Vichy has slept with only one open eye and in the end is not incompatible at all with the jihadist beast. And finally, it is not accurate to say that the policy of a particular state, I'm referring obviously to the state of Israel, generates anti-Semitism in the way clouds produce a storm. I have seen European capitals in which the destruction of the Jews was nearly total, yet where anti-Semitism still thrives. I have seen other capitals further away where no Jews have ever lived, yet where the word Jew was and is a synonym for the devil. And I must say here that even if Israel's conduct and behavior was exemplary, even if Israel were a nation of angels, even if we are granted the Palestinian people the state that is his right, even then, alas, this enigmatic and old hatred would not dissipate one iota. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, Mr. President, to understand how anti-Semitism really and concretely operates today, we must abandon these old clichés and rather listen to how it is expressed and how its worshippers justify it. Because after all, the anti-Semites have never been content to say, well, that's how it is. We are bad people and we hate the poor Jews. No. They have said, we hate the Jews because they killed Christ. That was Christian anti-Semitism. They have said we hate them because by producing monotheism, they invented Christ. That was the anti-Semitism of the Enlightenment, which wanted to get rid of religion altogether. They said in other times, we hate them because they belong to another species, recognizable by traits seen in them alone, and that pollute other species. That was racist anti-Semitism, and it was, again, another story. They even said, we have nothing against the Jews per se. No, really nothing at all. And we could not care less whether they killed or created Christ, or whether they are a separate race or not. Our complaint is just that most of them are plutocrats, bent on dominating the world and oppressing the humble. That was the socialism for dummies that throughout Europe infected the workers' movement at the time of the Dreyfus affair. Today, 2015, none of those arguments works anymore. For reasons having to do with the history of the terrible 20th century, Very few people, thanks God, remain unaware that those anti-Semitic arguments resulted in abominable massacres and are therefore, as a French anti-Semite writer once said, discarded by Hitlerism. So, for the old virus to resume its assault on people's brains and souls, for it once again be able to inflame crowds of ordinary people, for great numbers of women and men to resume hating while believing that they are sort of doing good, or if you prefer, to believe that there could be legitimate reasons to hate against the Jews, a new set of arguments is needed, one that history has not yet had time to debunk. Today's anti-Semitism says three things, more or less. It can operate on a large scale. It might one day, I hope not, convince and put fire in the brains only by offering three shameful and new propositions. Number one, the Jews are detestable because they are supposed to support an evil, illegitimate state. This is the anti-Zionist delirium of the merciless adversaries of the re-establishment of the Jews in their historical fatherland. Number two, the Jews are all the more detestable because they are supposed to base their beloved Israel on an imaginary suffering, or suffering that at the very least has been outrageously exaggerated and celebrated. This is the shabby and infamous denial of Holocaust. Number three, in so doing, the Jews would commit a third and final crime that would make them still more guilty, which is to confuse us with the memory of their deads, to completely stifle other people's memories, and to overshadow other martyrs whose death have plunged parts of today's world, more emblematically that of the Palestinians, into mourning. And here we come face to face with the modern-day scourge, stupidity, that is competitive victimhood. Anti-Semitism needs today these three formulations, which are like the three vital components of a moral atomic bomb. Each taken separately would be enough to discredit a people, to make it bad once more. But when the three are combined, brought into contact, and allowed to form a knot, a node, a crux, or an helix, well, at that point, we can be pretty sure of facing an explosion of which all Jews everywhere in the world will be the designated targets. What a bad people, they say, capable of all these three crimes. What a strange picture is formed by this community of men and women adulterating what they should hold most sacred, the memory of their dead, for the base purpose of legitimizing an illegitimate state and sentencing the rest of the world's victims to deaf and dumb silence. This is modern anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism will not return on a large scale unless it succeeds in popularizing this insane and vile portrait of the modern Jew. Anti-Semitism of today has to be anti-Zionist. It has to deny the Holocaust. It has to feed the competition of pain, or it will not thrive and happen. The logic is implacable, despicable, horrible, but compelling. To recognize that, ladies and gentlemen, is to begin to see symmetrically what you can do to combat this calamity. Let us imagine the UN General Assembly in which Israel would have its place, its full and due place, a country among others, no more and no less than others, bound by the same responsibility but enjoying the same rights. And let us imagine that you unanimously acknowledge it to be what it truly is, an authentic, solid, and at the end of the day, rare democracy. Let us imagine a UN General Assembly that, faithful to its founding agreement, would make itself the diligent guardian of the memory of the worst genocide ever conceived. Let's imagine that 2015 could be the year when, under your high authority and with the help of the very top world scientific scholars, the most complete, exhaustive, and definitive conference ever convened on the attempt to destroy the Jews was held. And let us dream at last, somewhere between New York, Geneva, or who knows, Jerusalem, let us dream of a second conference, a second one, yes, devoted to all the forgotten wars that cast their tragic shadow over the inhabited world, but that are not talked about too much because they do not fit within the frameworks of blocks and groups into which you divide yourselves. And let us dream then that this second conference, by adopting the position opposite to the stupid and grotesque idea that a given heart has room for just one object of compassion, empathy, and pain, reveals what was the real truth of the past decades. It was those remembering the Holocaust who immediately recognized the horror of ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. It was when we had in mind the standard of inhumanity of the Holocaust that we understood without delay and doubt what was happening and at stake in Rwanda or in Darfur. I could multiplicate, alas, the examples, but this is the law. Far from blinding us to the torment of others' peoples. The will to forget nothing of the torment of the Jewish peoples is always, which renders salient, obvious, the afflictions of the Burundian, Angolan, Zairian, and so many more, including Palestinians. By adopting such a program, you would be fighting real anti-Semitism of today. By, number one, rehabilitating this Israel that your assembly did bear on the baptismal fonts 70 years ago. By two, using your colossal authority in order to make shut up once and forever the negationist morons. And by three, bearing yourself in close support to the true damned and cursed that have been sacrificed in Durban, for example, on the altar of the anti-Zionist hysteria, you would be methodically deconstructing, debuilding one by one each of its components, but at the same time, I repeat and insist, you would be truly defending the cause of humanity. I would not be here, ladies and gentlemen, if I did not think that this forum is one of the only ones in the world, if not the only one, in which can be orchestrated the solidarity of the shaken, of which spoke the great Jan Patočka, the Czech philosopher, and which has been the thread, the through line of all my life. When in my country, the highest official of the government recently said, François Hollande, Manuel Valls, France without its Jews would no longer be France. They erected a dike against infamy. But when, in the same country, we French saw a quarter of you, one head of state or government out of four, marching beside us to say, I am Charlie, I am a Cope, and I am a Jew, it was a reason of true hope that we nearly had stopped waiting. Your presence here today, your will to make this event possible and perhaps memorable, your good faith and obvious will to act, all of this attests to the fact that on all continents, in all cultures and civilizations, people are beginning to realize that the struggle against anti-Semitism is an ardent, vibrant obligation for everyone. When a Jew is struck, said another writer, humanity falls to the ground. When you go after the Jews, insisted an early opponent of the Nazis, it is like a first line, crumbling under an invisible volley that eventually will hit the rest of us as it draws closer. A world without Jews, indeed, would not be a world. A world in which the Jews once again would become the scapegoats for all people's fears and frustrations would be a world in which free people could not breathe easy, and where the enslaved would be even more enslaved. It is up to you now to take the floor and act. It is up to you, who are the faces of the world, to be the architects of a house in which the mother of all hates would see its place reduced. May you, in a year's time, and the years after that, and every other year, reconvene to observe that your mobilization of today was not in vain, and that the beast can be kept at bay. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Levy for his statement. We have heard the last speaker for the opening segment.